everybody, and thanks for tuning in to another segment of my video series, Activate. This week I wanted to talk about brainwashing, indoctrination. How much are we affected? You know, there comes a time on our path, now that we've seen through the veil, now that we understand a greater truth, again, whether it is geopolitically or spiritually, we are seeing through the veil, and we are trying to wrap our heads around it within the mind that we already have. Now, that mind that we already have has been molded ever since we were children, has been indoctrinated, for lack of a better term, by society, by our peers, by education. And one of the aspects of awakening to me is to be honest about the fact that we have had a bit of indoctrination, a bit of brainwashing, that we, and I don't like to use this term, so forgive me for using it, but it's the best one I could think of right now, is that we were sheeple. We were in groupthink. We were in the nationalistic fervor, and the political fervor, and the religious fervor of our peer groups, until we had this kind of realization of, wow, you know, things are a lot different than I thought they were. And one of the ways that I have found for us to be aware of how, you know, how indoctrinated are we? How much of what we think, how much of what we do, how much of our reactions, how much of our passions, and how much of our beliefs, our personal story, come from being indoctrinated, again, through all of the ways that I have mentioned just a moment ago. The first thing that we have to do is we have to admit that indoctrination, programming, whatever you want to call it, is everywhere, and not all of it's bad. Not all of it's bad. You know, we were indoctrinated by our parents not to stick our hands on a hot stove. You know, a lot of it has to do with common life lessons and life achievements and whatnot, setting goals for ourselves, you know, how to have good manners, how to be a good human being, you know, the essentials of that. And I feel is what I would call proactive programming, which is it's great. It's a part of creating the goodness within us. What we also have to admit is that we have been programmed since our childhood as to what politics we might align with, what religion we align with, what brands are we aligning with, you know. How many of us have bought the latest, greatest gadget because all of our friends have the latest, greatest gadget? Even as adults, we see the phenomenon of consumerism with, you know, the grass is always greener syndrome, you know, keeping up with the Joneses, you know, well, he got an SUV, I need to get an SUV. You know, that type of reactive programming. And that's, you know, that's exactly what the media wants. They want you to feel that you need to have that latest gadget, that you need to have, you know, the latest toys. If you're, you know, you have to drink this beer if you're going to get that sexy woman. You have to look a certain way if you're going to be a real modern person. You have to act a certain way. I mean, I see it even in the behavior. You know, if we look at just the patterns of behavior throughout the decades, and, you know, I'm not an old-fashioned person at all, but I'm just making an observation. If you look back to, let's say, the 50s and maybe the early 60s, it was appropriate to have good manners, to be nice, you know, to, you know, be a supportive neighbor, a friendly neighbor, and whatnot. And as we move into, the 80s, the 90s, the early 2000s, we've seen how the media has portrayed, a great example is that movie Mean Girls. Mean Girls was the rage, and everyone had to be mean to be cool, and, you know, and it was like, horrible language, treating each other like crap, calling each other names. I mean, how many young people, and I was one of these young people 10 years ago, that would call a dear friend, hey, you know, bitch, yo, you know, calling them names as a term of endearment. You know, where did this programming, the psychological idea that calling people names, horrible names as a term of endearment was a good thing? I don't understand that. But I fell for it, and I'm sure many of you out there have fallen for it. So how can we tell how programmed we are? And that's the gist of what today's talk is about. I firmly believe that if we are going to achieve the goal of this so-called awakening, you know, one of the goals of the awakening is to be a free thinker, to be a sovereign thinker, to not be a sheeple. You know, how do we know when we are literally thinking for ourselves, or is it coming from our subconscious mind? So we have to, in order to achieve that sovereign mind, that individual thought process, we need to reconnect with that sovereign voice within us. I talk about it all the time, connecting with your higher self, your guides, whatever you want to call it, your soul, your heart. You know, what is that telling you? And is it coming from there, or is the thought process that you are following, that train of thought that you've jumped on, is it coming from a learned behavior, whether it was a learned behavior by the media, by your friends, by your family, by school or whatnot? So learning to be able to tell the difference between a reactive response, where did that response come from, or did it come from your heart? And I know I focus a lot on this because I think it's very important that we see and learn to observe ourselves. The whole idea of the awakening process, and whether it be, again, I speak to both, political and spiritual, whether it is to create change, yes, of course, we want to take action to make a better world, but at the same time, if our goal is to achieve a better us, to achieve an enlightened us, an awakened us, we have to work on ourselves, and that's where being aware of the subtleties within our own mind and our own thought patterns come in. I'll give you a very easy example for me, a very recent example. I grew up, as many of you know, I grew up in Miami. I was a South Beach kid. I was there when it all started, very, you know, high fashion, lots of money, lots of drugs, lots of discos and dancing and, you know, everything, you know, the epitome of the stereotype of what South Beach was in the 80s and 90s. I was there, and it was fun. You know, I'm not going to deny it. It was great. But with that came a certain stereotype of other regions. We were the coolest, we were the hottest, we were the trendiest, and my upbringing or my social conditioning had me believing that the South was backwards. You know, I live in Virginia now, which is why I'm saying this. So I was always told, you know, anything north of Palm Beach is the Bible Belt. Stay away from there. They're all backwoods dummies. They're not educated. They're Mountain Dew drinking, crystal meth, you know, smoking or whatever they do with that. I've never done that. You know, just very backwoodsy, redneck, you know, scary people with hoods, you know, burning crosses on your front lawn. And when I moved here, I was actually prepared for that. This was kind of a fluke for me to move here, and I was scared to death. I really was. The first several weeks, I even cut my hair off. I don't know if you guys remember back about 5 years ago, I cut my hair short because I didn't want people, you know, I didn't want to stand out to the rednecks. Little did I know that there were very educated people. I moved into a very progressive neighborhood. We call it the Gayborhood. Saw lesbians holding hands across the street, and I'm like, whoa, where am I? Is this Virginia? And as I got to know and have the experience of living in the region and traveling to other areas of the Bible Belt, for lack of a better term, yeah, there's a big emphasis on church. That's a whole nother show. But the bigotry wasn't there. The racism wasn't there. There was very educated people, very fashionable, great food, great restaurants, great nightclubs. I mean, who knew? So the point of all this that I'm trying to say is that I was brainwashed on that aspect, in that way. So what I'm asking you today is to think about aspects of your lives where perhaps you have a certain, well, this is just the way it is mentality about whether it be people, whether it be countries, whether it be religions, whether it be anything that's different than what you are or what you're accustomed to. What kind of prejudices do you have? Where did they come from? You know, I've had people say to me, I never realized I actually was a little racist. You know, I hear it all the time, living here, actually, because people are now evolving and getting more progressive. You know, they're like, oh, I never realized I thought it was a bad neighborhood just because there were dark-skinned people there. Meanwhile, you know, that neighborhood has better manicured lawns and better restaurants. You know, it's like, oh, you know, maybe I was a little racist, you know. These types of things are externally introduced into us. Racism is taught, bigotry is taught, hate is taught. When we are listening to our sovereign voice, that fear-based idea of the world around us, we realize that all of that came from the outside. All of that came from the outside. And as we are now awakening, going through the process of evolving further and further and further, we now find ourselves in a new arena of, whether you want to call it alternative media, alternative thinking, alternative movements. There are many of them out there. I'm not going to name them all, but let me just say that let us be aware that we don't jump from, I forgot the old Southern term, from the frying pan into the fire with the brainwashing thing. I've seen, and I'm sure you have, where we see people that have this awakening process, are going through the process, but have literally transferred their old brainwashing ways into the new awakened brainwashing. And what I mean by that are people who follow media people, talk show hosts, blogs, video, YouTube creator channels, you know, channelers actually is another one. And they take every word as if it is true without using discernment. And this is where I'm going with this, is eventually we need to learn to discern what is true for us being the sovereign voice within, that still small voice, which is doing its hardest to help you and to help us each evolve to a higher level of consciousness, a level of compassion, a level of awareness, a level of clarity, but it comes by using a specific discernment within us. If you find you are in groupthink again, and I was one of these people, I will say back 10 years ago, what is it, 2005, 12 years ago, when I started going through my other awakening, I was a huge fan of Mr. Alex Jones, and everything he said was great, and everyone agreed, and you know, he was right, look at this, and if you disagreed with him, man, you were ostracized on those blogs, you were ostracized from those groups, you were like, how dare you disagree with him, he's God, you know, whatever. And that's just an example. There are many, many out there. There are many out there, everything from channelers to radio hosts to Facebook pages. Beware of groupthink. Groupthink is another form of indoctrination and another form of brainwashing. So Are you stuck in a group think again? Did we go from one group think to another group think? So how brainwashed are you? How honest are you going to be with yourself to say, my thoughts really are my own? Or sometimes my thoughts may not be my own. I'm going to start being aware of that. Or, wow, I didn't realize how much my thoughts aren't my own. I better start doing something about it immediately. I'm going to go into all of this at a later date, go into a little more detail. Right now, I just wanted to get the ball rolling to talk about it. Let's bring this into a discussion. Please talk about it in the comments. I have a consciousness talk coming up next week, which I'm going to go into more detail about this and what you can do, give you a few more tips and tricks. But in the meantime, I want to thank you so much for watching again. I really love talking to all of you. I love hearing from you. Thank you for supporting this work, and thank you for supporting the awakening of humanity. This is a team effort. This is a team effort, and you're a part of it, and I thank you for that. I love you so much. Bye-bye.